Chairman, thank you, and thank you for providing the Natural Resources Defense Council with the opportunity to testify today. I've provided in my testimony a summary of recommendations for the Congress. The highest priority, I believe, is to pass a climate bill that puts stringent limits on CO2 emissions and other greenhouse gas emissions. This is not only the best and most economically efficient way to mitigate climate change, but it is the single policy that would provide the greatest benefit to the domestic nuclear power industry. Secondly, the Congress should stop subsidizing the construction of new nuclear power plants and reject further subsidies for new nuclear plants in climate mitigation legislation. The economically inefficient way to mitigate climate change is to continue to subsidize new nuclear plants. This will penalize and slow investments in improved energy efficiency and energy supply technologies that can mitigate climate change in less time with less cost and risk. Third, you should terminate the Department of Energy's misguided 100-plus year effort to close the nuclear fuel cycle and introduce fast burner reactors into the United States, and terminate funding for research on advanced nuclear fuel reprocessing. You should establish an unbiased outside commission to report on ways to improve the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's safety culture. The biggest barrier to significant improvement of U.S. nuclear plant safety is the poor safety culture of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Finally, you should initiate a search, or have the Department of Energy initiate a search for a second geologic repository for the disposal of spent fuel. Nuclear power has both benefits and costs. On the benefit side, it's a low carbon emitter, it's a reliable generator of electricity, it provides low cost electricity from existing plants, it has a reliable and plentiful supply of fuel, and low health impacts from routine plant emissions. On the other side of the ledger, it increases the risk of nuclear weapons proliferation. You run the risk of another catastrophic nuclear accident. It has significant unresolved waste disposal problems. It has significant unresolved health and environmental problems associated with uranium mining. And new nuclear plants will not be economical in the United States until competing fossil generation is required to pay a significant financial penalty for its carbon emissions. Polluters should pay, and efficient way to deal with that issue is to cap carbon. Now, I've provided an analysis of the projections of nuclear power globally based on the World Nuclear Association's database. This is a snapshot of all the reactors in operation, under construction, planned, and proposed. And if you look at those, the future of that set of reactors, this snapshot, and ask what's the climate mitigation offset, the carbon emission avoided, you see it's about over and above what it would be today if you maintain the current global level of nuclear power. The growth is about 6% of what's needed to address this climate change problem. Now, that's number is very uncertain. It could certainly be twice that, because that number does not include nuclear plants from the 2030 to 2050 period, because that's beyond the horizon for companies to propose new plants. But nuclear has made a contribution to climate mitigation. It will continue to make a contribution to climate mitigation. And the issue for the Congress and for us is not whether you are for or against nuclear power. The climate issue in terms of domestic policy is whether the Congress, the federal government, should continue to subsidize new nuclear plant construction. And in our view, the Congress should not. And I've stated earlier why I think that would actually slow the process down by curtailing investments in technologies that can get us there sooner and at less risk. Now, it's also, I believe, additional subsidies are not needed. My friend Marilyn Cray is president of New Start. New Start participants, the 10 utilities, own or operate 2/3 of the nuclear power plants in this country. They have a combined assets of, I don't know the precise figure, but I would say on the order of $400 billion. The General Electric Company, which is also a participant, the second largest corporation in the world, has assets of $400 billion alone. You do not need to subsidize these people. They can provide the risk insurance for their own investments by collaborating as they've done in New Start.
Mr. Cochran, if you could, we're trying to be generous with the time, but if you might bring it to a close and we can explore your suggestions in the questions.
Sure. Well, let me just say that the greatest concern I have about the global expansion of nuclear power is the proliferation risk. And the international safeguards regime, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the IAEA safeguards and other elements, is not adequate today to safeguard many of the fuel cycle facilities that are used by the nuclear power industry globally. And we see that being played out in Iran and North Korea. And it's unfortunate, but all of the big problems with nuclear have been fostered over onto the federal government for various reasons. Proliferation, that's a government problem. Safety of catastrophic accidents, the government assumes the risk of catastrophic accidents. Waste is so toxic and it contains plutonium, it can be used for weapons. That's a government problem. The government is not solving these problems. These problems are endemic and they remain. And you've got to address these fundamental problems before we expand nuclear power significantly on a global basis.
Thank you, Mr. Cochran.